All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to today's webinar on DNA consultations at American Ancestors. My name is Kathleen McKenzie, Education and Programming Manager here at American Ancestors and the New England Historic Genealogical Society, and I will be the moderator for today's session. This program is brought to you by the Brew Family Learning Center. American Ancestors and New England Historic Genealogical Society is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history and are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. Our presenter today is genealogist Melanie McComb. Melanie assists library visitors both on-site and online with their family history research. She also presents lectures on a variety of genealogical topics, both around the United States and internationally. Melanie holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the State University of New York at Oswego. Her areas of research interest include, of course, DNA, as well as genealogical technology, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Kansas, Prince Edward Island, Quebec, Ireland, Jewish genealogy, and military records. An American Ancestors DNA consultation can help you make the most of using DNA in your family history research. Maybe you've taken a DNA test and need help deciphering results, or you're interested in learning techniques on breaking down one of your genealogical brick walls, or maybe you want to learn about some of the many third-party tools that are available. This webinar will review our DNA consultation service and discuss the types of scenarios you may consult with an expert genealogist about, and we'll also review a case study from one of our past clients. At any point during the presentation, please feel free to type your question into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. We'll address those at the end. There's also no handout for this presentation, but we are recording this event, and starting tomorrow, you can freely go back and review any of the content from this presentation on our website. So if you missed something during the live session, don't worry, you can always review the presentation later. All right, so without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Melanie.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen, and welcome everybody. In today's presentation, we're going to be talking about some of the basics, the different tests available, why you should use DNA, and then start going into more of the details about exactly what is a DNA consultation, including the different types of tools that we can cover, including GEDmatch and DNA Painter. And we're actually going to follow up with two different case studies from some of our clients, how you can go about signing up for a consultation if you're interested, and of course, looking at different resources on americanancestors.org. So let's start with the basics on the DNA, starting with the biology and how you understand what DNA is, first off. DNA is the building blocks of who we are, and there are primarily three different types of DNA that we're looking at. First is the autosomal DNA, which is the 22 chromosome pairs, otherwise known as the autosomes, which does not include the sex chromosomes. Then you have your sex chromosomes, which are going to include the X or the Y, and depending on your sex, that's going to depend on what you have or you're passed down. And then there's also mitochondrial DNA, which is the powerhouse of the cell, as we were told in biology class, which is producing energy. These are all different places that we have DNA that can be extracted and be used for different analysis into looking into our families. So DNA is an important component because obviously this hereditary material is what's been passed down generation over generation. And depending on the type of DNA, that could be as recent as just a few hundred years, going back even more thousands of years with things like the sex chromosomes going back. There are different testing companies that are available that use different genetic markers, that they call it, to compare your DNA to others that have tested, as well as those that are placed in what's known as a population group. These population groups are based on people that are living in a particular area for many, many generations and can document their family. So they're used as a good reference population on how we can measure our DNA. One thing to keep in mind is that your ethnicity results are speculative and they will change over time as we refine those population groups. So you often will see that maybe you get a little more Scottish or another ethnicity over time, just increasing or decreasing as the different sites are changing. These are because each of these different sites have different algorithms for how ethnicity is calculated. And so be patient that as we have more and more results, as they get larger and larger, you're going to get more refined data. So we're going to review the different types of DNA tests available that you can use. There is the autosomal DNA test, which is the most common one that you may be using through sites like Ancestry, Family Tree DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage, Living DNA. And this also includes testing the X chromosome. Then there are the more specialized tests known as the Y DNA test, which is testing the direct male line, and the mitochondrial test, which is testing the direct female line. These two specialized tests are available through Family Tree DNA, and there's even some limited options for Y DNA also being offered through Living DNA. So going through the autosomal test, as we noted, we're going to look at the different pieces of the autosomal chromosomes that we're going to be examining for analysis. So as you are inheriting DNA, you're only getting portions of that DNA being passed down over time, with your parents giving you the largest chunks, and over time it being divided into each time. As I mentioned, there's this breakdown of dividing in two. So let's kind of see it as a representation. So we have your parents, you get 50% from either side, from one side from the paternal side, one side from the maternal. And then you keep going backwards, you divide that number by 2. So you get into your grandparents of 25%, great-grandparents about 12.5%, and then etc. Keep going back here. So as you can see that the chance of being passed down DNA is decreasing each time with each generation. So the chances of sharing DNA with a third great grandparent is a lot less than if you were looking at your more recent generations, which could explain why maybe you haven't inherited DNA at that point. Autosomal DNA is best for looking at a lot of your closer cousins because it's only going to cover roughly through your 5th great grandparents. So looking at those 6 cousins or so. So you're only really getting back to about 6 or 7 generations. After that, then you need to use the more specialized tests like the Y DNA and the mitochondrial. Autosomal can be very good to tell you which chromosomes are going to come from each side of your family, whether it's your maternal side or your paternal side. And this can be derived in more detail if your parents had provided a sample, but there are now tools available which can start to give you more of an idea of which matches match up. But from a chromosomal standpoint, it helps that we can test the older generation as much as possible. We also can use autosomal DNA for giving us continental origins about where our family came from. And over time, we might find that it's starting to get more into a country level, but at the very least, we can get back to at least what continent everyone's from. With the Y DNA test, as I mentioned, it's testing the Y chromosome. So it's looking at the direct male line going back thousands of years. And this is one of your sex chromosomes. So each male, this is being passed down from father to son over many years. And with this test, though, right now, currently, the main company is going to be Family Tree DNA, but also some tests are being done by Living DNA. So as you can see, when you're doing Y DNA testing, it's following that chain of father to son. Now, obviously, that can have an impact if there is a non-paternal event or an unexpected father that is in the mix that will impact your DNA results if you're noticing changes when you're reviewing them. So when you want to look at Y DNA, why we use it? We use that to research your paternal ancestry. It's very common that we'll get questions like, how do I know the English ancestry of my ancestor that came over during the Great Migration, or even after that, so at a time period where autosomal DNA has already run out. So when you're trying to look at those questions, like someone coming over in the 1600s, this is a good use of how to use this DNA, is using the Y DNA and finding those living male descendants to take that test. There also are projects called one name study projects that you can use to learn more about your particular family. And Y-DNA is very much recommended, and in some cases, the only type of DNA being used. With the mitochondrial test, as I noted, it's testing a different part of your cells, looking at the part that's contributing most of your energy here. Your mitochondrial DNA that's being tested is what's known as a full sequence test. It used to be that you didn't have all of the rings of the DNA being tested. So now it's actually testing different parts of the mitochondria, which is giving a bigger probability of looking at that full maternal line going backwards. Now, the mitochondrial test can actually be taken by anyone. It can be taken by males and females, because it's going to test your direct female line. But the inheritance is only going to be from mother to child. So a male will have their mother's mitochondrial DNA, but they will not pass it on to their children. It's only from mother to child. It's very rare cases I've seen where there actually has been some inheritance happening. The primary company that's doing mitochondrial testing is Family Tree DNA. So mitochondrial DNA is good for looking at those maternal ancestry questions. In particular, I find it very helpful when you're trying to answer a question of if two people have the same mother or maternal grandmother. You can use that by finding living female descendants of each of those to see if they match up and are showing as exact matches. You also can use this similarly as we did for the males with the Y DNA by looking at those early female immigrants coming over in the 1600s, because this is at a time period that is beyond autosomal DNA. So let's go into some more reasons about why you should use DNA when you're doing genealogy. DNA is a very good way to test a hypothesis. In order to test to see how much your genealogy will hold up with what you've already done. Can you confirm the parentage of a particular ancestor, for example, is a very common hypothesis that we might see. You also can use this to confirm your matrilineal or patrilineal origins to find out where your family originally came from. It also can help you identify if there was any kind of non-paternal events where you notice that there could have been a different parent in the mix, particularly on the father's side. And it can open up a can of worms. Genealogist Amy Johnson Crow had stated at one conference online that DNA can be very disruptive. So it's something to keep in mind that when you are doing DNA, that things do happen. There are surprises that do come up, so you need to be aware of that when you're doing this. You may find there's adoptions, there might be cases of those non-paternal events and things coming up into the into the discussion, whether there were affairs and other things or abandonment. So a lot of emotions and history can come up with this. Now, what DNA can't do? So you can't necessarily solve a brick wall ancestor without doing any genealogy. You do need a paper trail in order to help address solving this. It won't do it on its own. It can't tell you what tribe of Native American ancestry you have. You may see that you have Native American ancestry, but it won't go down to the level of telling you exactly what tribe you belong to. That information is reserved for looking at tribal rolls and other records. And if you think you might have a distant kinship to a particular person, it's not going to be enough to be proof positive, whether you're looking at a famous person in history or just someone you're trying to prove. It's not enough on its own. There are two different types of trees that we do in genealogy, especially when we're looking at DNA. There's your genealogical tree, which includes all of your ancestors, and then there's the genetic tree of who you actually inherit DNA from. This can be different depending on what happens in records, because records lie, but DNA necessarily doesn't. So you have a 100% probability of inheriting DNA from your great-grandparents or second great-grandparents, as we saw in that chart earlier. And as we go on about going through, you have about a 95% chance about getting DNA from your fifth great-grandparents. But as you go on and on, when you get down to eighth great-grandparent, you have less than a 50% chance that you will inherit DNA from them, and only about 15% DNA for a 10th great-grandparent. So when you're trying to look at lines going back, maybe you're looking at someone that, came over on the Mayflower, there's a very little chance that you're going to have, DNA coming through. So especially when you're looking at autosomal DNA only through about 5 to 8 generations. DNA is also a great way to get in touch with cousins that you didn't know about that shared those same ancestors. I can't tell you how many times I've been in touch with many of my DNA cousins, as I call them, and have encountered so many different things, whether it's photographs of family members I never saw pictures of, learning stories about them from their lives, and coming across even unpublished manuscripts just by someone studying that name. I'm actually working with several of my cousins that are looking into the Clerkin family that came from County Monaghan, Ireland to Prince Edward Island, and I'm kind of a mystery to them. They're trying to figure out how I fit in. So DNA can just open up so many things. And maybe you come across like family heirlooms or that missing elusive family Bible you've heard referenced. DNA is a valuable tool when you're trying to find out more and learn more about a particular family and to understand more of the intricacies. And it also opens up more to looking into the additional children and siblings of a family, because you do look at that extension. A very big tip I have for using DNA is you want to think about what are your goals? What are you trying to solve for when you're using DNA, and what are you trying to analyze? Because it can be very overwhelming when you look at any DNA analysis that's done. Your eyes may start to glaze over looking at all the numbers and data and think it's too much. So try to think of more digestible goals about what do you want to know. So here are some common goals that you may want to learn about. For example, do you want to learn about your ethnic origins, connecting with cousins and biological family? Those are all good examples for using autosomal DNA. If you wanted to identify the father of a male ancestor within 5 generations, you would use autosomal and probably a little bit of Y DNA in there as well. However, once you get back beyond those 5 generations or so, and you're going about 5 to 15, now you're looking at more Y DNA to look at that historic male ancestor. Similarly, if you're looking at the female ancestor within 5 generations, you would be using autosomal and possibly mitochondrial DNA. But once you go 5 to 15 generations back, you're looking at mitochondrial. And then there are certain tests you can use, like autosomal, like 23andMe and other sites, to learn about health predispositions. As I mentioned, these are the major companies that are doing DNA testing today. So all of these are going to be using autosomal DNA, and family tree DNA is really the specialized one for the Y and the mitochondrial, and living DNA is also doing some limited Y DNA as well. This is just a little bit of a chart breakdown, just to give you an idea of how these companies are very different, which is why you might get different ethnicity results and different matches. So to give you an idea, and these results were also taken based on data as of November of last year, there is over 21 million people in Ancestry.com. It's huge. And so when you compare that with Family Tree only having about 1.2 million, you can understand why we like to recommend using Ancestry. It's just got a larger footprint in the DNA world. Now, each of these all have varying costs, but roughly, you're looking at about $100, maybe a little slightly less on Family Tree, about $79 for a test. Many of these sites run different sales throughout the year, so it's always good to pay attention to any major holidays and DNA Day when they offer different discounts. There are different methods of collecting DNA. Some of them do saliva. Family Tree does a cheek swab, for example. And that can have an impact if you're working with individuals that may have a hard time generating enough saliva, such as older adults, where a cheek swab might be preferred. And there's different features that are available. So a lot of features are going to overlap, including being able to look at matches and searching by surnames. However, other types of testing that's available may not show up. So, you may not see things like medical information. That's something that a lot of companies are starting to dabble into more and look into, but like currently Ancestry doesn't really do much with the medical. You're seeing that more with like 23andMe, and actually I think even MyHeritage now has an option now for like connecting with a genetic counselor for information. So with these testing companies, as I mentioned, all these do autosomal, with the exceptions being Family Tree and Living DNA doing some more specialized as well. So now let's go into the meat of why we're here today. We're talking about what is our DNA consultation service. So as one of the genealogists, I am one of the two genealogists here that conduct the majority of consultations for our organization. And we conduct these sessions either in person in our building, on the phone, or online via Zoom. So we have lots of different options available. A lot of our patrons do like to elect to use Zoom because one, it's protecting privacy, and two, it's also giving you the ability to have the session recorded so they can play it back. DNA can get very complicated, and you may want to refer to it regularly by going back to the session about what was being stated. During these consultations, myself and my colleague, we actually will review the test results of what you've given us. And typically that's giving us logins so we can see everything. We'll want to review your tree or any supporting documentation about your question, and just see if we can help you understand what your goals are, give you some suggestions on maybe other people you want to test, whether and what types of tests they should take, and think about maybe other resources. So we may think of other resources while we're talking and say, hey, you know what, there's actually some genealogy resources on the paper trail I would also do in conjunction with this that may help you corroborate this potential ancestor that you're getting, that's getting shown to you on this site. So we can definitely marry up a lot of the paper trail in addition into that DNA consultation. Now, there are different types of consultations available within DNA. I always like to tell our patrons, it is customized based on what your goals and questions are, because we know everybody's circumstances are going to be very different. We could be working with someone that just wants a general overview of, I got my results back. What does this mean? What do I do with it? And then we can actually then go through those platforms where they've tested, whether it's Ancestry, 23andMe, Family Tree, MyHeritage, go over what the results say, starting with your ethnicity estimates, going into your match list, and maybe showing you even a few tools that you can use within it. We also have a lot of cases where we're dealing with unknown parentage. And this could be either at a close level where it's a great-grandparent or closer, or it could be a second great-grandparent and older. And those have different techniques on how we use them. So if someone is dealing with an adoption, an abandonment, an unknown parent, or little history known, there are different techniques that we can use, and we'll talk about that in a moment. If someone is planning a trip, for example, or wants to know about their immigrant origins, DNA is another thing that can be used. I always like to say, when you're trying to plan a trip internationally to especially explore your ancestry roots, if you haven't already done your DNA, that might be something that would be helpful if you need to especially expedite and find out where your family's from. because we can use that DNA analysis to at least point you in the right direction and hopefully get you at least into the county, if not towns, where you likely have family that go back to. We can go over different third-party tools, including GEDmatch and DNA Painter, and other tools that you might think of as you're going through this. Or maybe you're interested in thinking about how you conduct a DNA study. I've worked with many patrons that have conducted a Y-DNA or mitochondrial study, even combined with autosomal DNA, when they want to answer a particular question, such as those individuals that may have come over in the 1600s or even later and are trying to answer them. It could be for something for a scholarship, writing for an article that they want to put in the register, our journal, or maybe it's a question of curiosity, or maybe they're trying to prove a line, such as if they belong to, as a descendant of the Mayflower, have a DAR, SAR patriot, or even maybe even go back a ways to a further ancestor. The length of the session is typically 60 minutes. We find that this gives us enough time to really go through the analysis that's recommended. The cost currently is $150 an hour for paid members, and for guest members, it's $250 an hour. Our membership currently for an annual membership is $99.95 a year, and we also have a 3-month option if you want to try it out for 3 months and see what that is. That's at $34.95. So that's another way you can get that cost savings. We also can do an extended session. So if you're thinking an hour is not going to be enough, or you want to go over multiple lines, we might recommend setting up a 2-hour session, which actually gets conducted and part of what we call our personal genealogist for the day. So it's just an extended consultation session that we can do. And we typically do those online via Zoom or in person in our library when we're open. As I noted, a lot of our patrons like to elect for Zoom for privacy reasons. So let's talk a little bit more about privacy. When we're setting up your consultation, the DNA results are shared with a genealogist that is actually conducting that consultation. We usually request that they send us the login credentials, usernames, and passwords for the sites where they have tested. Some sites do allow you to do a sharing invitation, such as Ancestry.com. However, most of them do not have that feature, so we require the login. That login information is only going to the genealogist that's doing the session, and it just allows them to make sure, one, they can log in so they can see everything they need to see and make sure that everything is set up for our session. Sometimes we might find that maybe we need to turn on some features in order to have a better effective session, and we would contact you for those. We also want to make sure that we can prep for that session. So we're going to have a limited amount of prep time before we actually meet for our consultation. And right now our current window is roughly 4 to 6 weeks out for our consultations. And then finally, we're going to then log into that session over the Zoom or in person in order to show you and basically drive that conversation. So we go that. You may want to elect to have a temporary password on your login credentials and then change it back after we're done with them and have given you our notes to safeguard any kind of permanent passwords that you might want to use. We also send along any Zoom recordings and follow-up notes with you. And these are not shared with anybody else unless permission has been obtained. And this also includes lectures as well. So if we are doing any kind of case studies, as we're noting here, please note that we actually obtain written permission from the clients before we use them. So you'll have some reassurance that we're not going to be sharing that information without your consent. One thing to keep in mind of not in scope, though, is we cannot do any health or medical reports and analysis, whether it's from 23andMe, MyHeritage, or any other sites. While I do have a scientific background, I am not a physician and I'm not a genetic counselor. So we would recommend that any of those test results you have maybe any medical concerns of, that these really should be directed to the medical field and not to us. So let's talk about some of the different techniques that are used during the DNA consultation. We will review your ethnicity estimates in detail and notice if there's any particular changes or percentages that might suggest something different than what you expected, is also maybe giving potential clues when you're trying to go backwards to some later great grandparents. We then will want to do a deep dive on your tree and look at any of your shared matches that have similar surnames and geographical locations where we want to focus on. So we ask you to think about certain lines that you're really interested in to focus that discussion. And then we can use that to really look into those matches to see who are the lines we really should chase down based on where they are living at that time. If you're using Ancestry DNA, we also review your ancestry through lines connections. While it is a theory, it can give you some valuable information on how you might be related to some of these matches, and we'll show that in one of our case studies in a little bit. We also use a method called the Leeds method, which was invented by genealogist Dana Leeds, who has come up with a way to look into DNA analysis on your matches, and it's using a visual clustering technique. This can be a very valuable way to understand and identify the ancestry of someone in your family that has unknown parentage. So whether it's your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, we can use that method to really start to look into very specific matches and start to narrow in on them. And we also can even do DNA triangulation. Now, this can get a little bit more detailed because DNA triangulation is looking at yourself, another match that you know how they relate to you, and other matches. So you need at least 2 other matches to really conduct proper triangulation. Sometimes this involves having to use more advanced tools on GEDmatch and other sites. So sometimes this may require an additional hour or extended sessions to really do more detailed triangulation. So as I mentioned, there are different third-party tools available that we also can help with, and that includes sites like gedmatch.com. Gedmatch.com was originally founded as a volunteer site, and now it's been taken over by Verigen, and I think there was another acquisition that was going on as well. And it's a site that you can upload your DNA from different DNA testing sites. So whether you tested it at Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA. At one point they were accepting National Geographic, I think even Sorensen, and maybe CRI Genetics, I think as well. So it is one place where you could upload your DNA. So even if you don't take a test with every single company or have your DNA uploaded to those sites, you could see matches from other companies that you may not have seen if you weren't on GEDmatch, which is why it's a valuable way of using this for DNA. So on gedmatch.com, what you can do is you can open an account, and that's going to involve downloading your raw DNA from the sites where you've tested your DNA. And there are different instructions and videos on GEDmatch that tell you how to download your raw DNA. And you're just going to basically download it to your computer, and then you can then upload it to GEDmatch. And then it's going to go through a processing and create what's known as a kit. That processing sometimes can take a few days to have that done. Now, gedmatch.com has 2 different sets of tools. There are free tools that you can use, and then there are paid tools known as Tier 1. Tier 1 is currently about $10 a month for additional tools where you can use more advanced tools that we'll show you in a moment. So this is what the homepage looks like for GEDmatch. They've been adding a lot more to their education tab on videos, so you can learn more about it. It is a free site that you can use for your DNA analysis. And so this gives you a side-by-side view of the different tools available. So the free tools are largely going to involve looking at the different kits, as we call them, looking at your match list. So you can do a one-to-one comparison where if you know someone is on GEDmatch, they can give you their kit number, and then you can basically compare your kit number against their kit number and see if you have any DNA shared. So that can be a fun way to see if you might be related to any potential friends or acquaintances. You also might be running your one-to-many list. Your one-to-many list is almost like generating a match list in your DNA sites. It's letting you see all the different people that your kit matches to in the system. You also may want to look at other features such as, are your parents related? Give you a probability based on your DNA if there is some pedigree collapse going back. There also is a 3D chromosome browser. There's the ability to search if you match multiple kits. So those are some of the free tools. The tier 1 tools gives you other options where you're doing more individual segment search. So if you wanted to search on specific parts of the segments of the chromosomes, if you wanted to do a larger kit analysis, you could do that. And there are some fun ones in there too, besides advanced triangulation. For example, there's a type of tool called phasing. Phasing is a way to create a kit when you want to create the kit of a parent, for example, but you only have one parent's DNA. So my father had actually taken a DNA test, and I had taken a DNA test. My mother did not take one and is not interested in taking one. So I actually created a phase kit by running the DNA against my kit and my father's, and then it was able to determine the DNA that I did not inherit from my father must have come from my mother. So it created almost like its own research kit that you can use to look at the matches for that part of the family. You also can look at tools like My Evil Twin and see the DNA that you did not inherit from family. It's kind of a fun tool. There is also a tool called Lazarus. Lazarus can be a tool that could be used to, let's say, recreate the kit of a grandparent by using yourself and other cousins and other relatives. If there's enough relatives involved, you can create a kit to, quote, raise from the dead a grandparent and have a DNA kit for them. And there's other tools that you can use available, including clustering, and they keep adding more and more on. Now, there are some GEDmatch discounts available I want to tell you about. So American Ancestors members will receive 10% off when they purchase a GEDmatch Tier 1 membership. There will be a follow-up email after this session in which you will receive a promo code that you can use if you are a paid member of American Ancestors that you can use to purchase these GEDmatch Tier 1 tools if you're interested. If you're currently a Tier 1 GEDmatch member and you are not currently a paid member with American Ancestors, you can receive a $25 discount. And you can learn more on gedmatch.com and how to redeem this. Another tool you may want to use is DNA Painter. DNA Painter is a visual way to paint or to demonstrate your chromosomes. So this is an example out of the DNA Painter tool in which it lists the different chromosomes. So it's going to list 1 through 22, and then also the X chromosome as well. And you'll see that on the right-hand side, there's a legend there that shows the different colors. So what happens is that you can take the DNA segment information from sites like GEDmatch, 23andMe, MyHeritage, or Family Tree, unfortunately not Ancestry, and you basically go to paint a new match, and that adds that detail in there. So as you find more and more cousins that you have the DNA information for, you can paint it, and it visually can show you where that DNA is coming from. So when you do that, that can make it a very easy way to show what ancestors you're likely getting DNA from based on the segment information that you've inherited from them. There also is a tool in DNA Painter called What Are the Odds, or WADO for short, where it can test out theories on how you're related to different people. You can create a tree, or you can upload your GEDCOM file. And what you do is you basically add the DNA information on different individuals. So you'll see that there's one for Marjorie and Galen. There's different centimorgan amounts, the amount of DNA. And what's happening is that you basically put down a hypothesis, the lines in blue, to tell you what the likelihood that that person is a descendant of that based on the DNA. So as the DNA score, the score for the hypothesis goes up, that shows the probability that it's likely. Now, if we see the hypothesis in the middle with Anna born 1887, which looks to be mother of Alfred, who is the mother of a son, and sorry, the father of a son, and then the son is the father of this hypothesis person, it's showing a very large score. So it's showing it's more likely that that's the likely scenario than the one at the bottom there where it shows Richard born 1928 is the father. So now we're going to go through a few different case studies to show the types of scenarios that we've actually encountered in DNA consultations to give you an idea of what is possible. Case study 1 was a case of identifying a maternal grandfather. The client wanted to know more about this maternal grandfather, and it was based on what information she had. So the background we had was that the mother was born about 1918 in Vermont. There was no father listed on the city register for the birth or a baptism record. There was family lore that the maternal grandfather was a soldier during World War I and had the surname of Lesueur. And there was one candidate that the client identified was a Robert Francis Lesueur that was living in the vicinity of where the mother was born. So the client came to me to find out if this Robert Francis Lesueur was indeed her maternal grandfather based on her DNA. First, we did an ethnicity estimate breakdown. Now, as you can imagine, Lesueur is a very French-sounding name. And, well, there wasn't really necessarily a very strong presence of French. Now, that French could have very much been bundled into the England and Northwestern Europe, but we thought it was very interesting that there was an unknown amount of Wales DNA, 15%, that wasn't previously identified on their ancestry. So we thought, that's curious. Let's keep that in mind when we're searching through. We conducted a match analysis going through the DNA, and we searched and searched, and we could not find any identification of a Lesueur match in her through lines or even in the surnames on the matches in Ancestry, which made us think that perhaps Lesueur was not the correct surname, and this was strictly family lore. So we needed to use the method that we talked about earlier called the Leeds method to identify the great-grandparents' DNA matches among the second and third cousins. So how we do that is we make a list of anybody that fits within the second or third cousin range. We put that in column A. And then what we do is we start with the first match. We go through their shared matches, and you can get the shared matches on each of these different sites, and we assign it a color. So in this case, we started JD with yellow. And anybody that was a shared match between the client and this JD, they also got yellow. So PR got yellow, CG got yellow, and VD got yellow. Once all of those have been accounted for within that list, we then move on to the next match, which is AS, and we gave it a new color, which is green. And we did the same exercise. So typically what you'll see is that you'll get 4 colors representing each of the great-grandparents. However, if there is a case of a non-paternal event or someone that's unknown, sometimes you do get an additional extra one as well. So you'll notice that on the right-hand side, I have 3 colors for the paternal side and 2 on the maternal. And some of that could have been some pedigree collapse on the person's father's side of the family as well. Excuse me. Now, what we needed to do then next is we looked at the different matches for what we identified on the maternal side of the family. And we kept looking for any indication of a common ancestor that we wanted to investigate further. And we kept noticing that there's one family that kept coming up over and over again, and that was the Rice family. One of the matches' grandfather was a William Rice. his parents were listed as Christopher Ernest Rice and Ellen Crandall. We looked at another matches in that cluster, and that match, CG's grandfather was a Christopher Edward Rice, and his parents were also Christopher Ernest Rice and Helen Crandall, suggesting that Christopher and William were brothers. We then looked at another match. JB's great-grandfather was a Gerald Albert Rice, born 1896, and we noticed that his parents were also Christopher Ernest Rice and Helen Crandall. DNA match VD's second great-grandfather was Gerald Albert Rice, so we could see that connection going back. And we even found a matches line that went back on the Crandall line to a Tracy Crandall and Mehitable Lyman, who were determined to be the parents of Helen Crandall. So in doing this, we actually researched that Christopher Ernest Rice because we found that he was looking very interesting. There was a lot of commonalities that we were finding. And the biggest thing we found was also that he was born in Wales. So that is very consistent with a great-grandfather being 100% Welsh. And as you notice, she had about 13.5%. That's very consistent with a great-grandparent being of 100% that ethnicity. And doing some research, we found that Christopher had 6 sons. And while it seems like, well, 6 sons, that's a lot of possibilities, we also found that of one of the matches had a much stronger likelihood to be the maternal grandfather. And that was because the granddaughter and great-grandson of Gerald Albert Rice tested their DNA. And the granddaughter appeared as a first or second cousin to the client, and the great-grandson appeared as a second or third cousin to the client. Now, if these relationships were further out, we could say that it might be another possibility, but this looked very likely that we'd identified the correct father, maternal grandfather. So in conclusion, Christopher Ernest Rice and Helen Crandall were definitely confirmed to be the maternal great-grandparents, and we said that the most likely candidate for that the maternal grandfather, I should say, not great-grandfather, is their son, Gerald Albert Rice. And then additional testing was recommended to the client on the other descendants of the other sons to help rule out the other candidates, because they should have a lower number of centimorgans of DNA shared with the client compared with those other 2 descendants. So now let's go into case study number 2, which is identifying the origins and parentage of James S. Phillips. So for some background, we're going to look at an older ancestor here. James S. Phillips was born approximately 1780, and we think probably born in Pennsylvania. He had married Catherine, last name not known, about 1810. The children that we know about were John, Catherine, Peter, Daniel, Ellen, and Solomon. And all of them, as far as we know, were all born in Pennsylvania, with a concentration being in Clearfield County. We were able to document to the family based on different census records throughout Clearfield in different townships, from Bradford in 1820, Decatur in 1830, 1840 was in Fox, and Woodward in 1850 and 1860. The birthplace for him was also noted as Pennsylvania for James. So we looked at Y DNA first. The client's father had taken a test, and he was a Phillips. And we found that he actually had a close match with a genetic distance of 1, which indicates there's just a slight mutation that's occurring there. And this person had reported their earliest ancestor was a James Phillips. The next closest match had a genetic distance of 3. So that's starting to be more and more distant, and the probability is getting less likely to be able to figure out with autosomal DNA. The results were even then uploaded to the surname project group for the Phillips family. So when we looked at these DNA matches, you can see what I meant by the genetic distance, which is the second column there. The first one showing 1 step, the second one showing 3 steps. The earliest known ancestor is self-reported information based on what the match had put down. So James Phillips and Michael Phillips. And we can see that they have a variant of the Y haplogroup R, which is a European group, but they are slightly different. But the difference between them is quite large. And within the Phillips surname project group, we found that they were clustered together along with other matches that we found here. Now, so in addition to that Michael that was noted there, most of them had all tied them back to that same James Phillips. So we needed more information to go on. So we looked at ancestry and then started with the through lines to see if we could figure out any possibilities about who the father could be. One of the possibilities was proposed as a John H. Phillips. However, there was an issue when we reviewed the through lines. The suspected father was supposed to be born in 1755 in England and died in 1823 Maine, which didn't quite jibe with the migration of the family. And when we reviewed the through lines, there was nothing found. So when you start to see a large amount of DNA for the son, 66 matches, and nothing for the father, that suggests there's probably an issue with the lineage. So in looking at that, we needed to dive more to see what was going on and see why is John not working and if there was a better candidate. So we then had to go back to the 5th great grandparent level, going one step back, and we noticed that for Joseph John Phillips, who is the suspected grandfather of James S. Phillips, that in addition to the John H. Phillips that was noted there actually were several other matches noted. Now, 2 of those matches were actually for a John Phillips. So we thought that was interesting. And the dates were actually off a bit. So the dates actually were, only off by 1 year, 1756 on the birth year, but the dates of death was different, 1836 and 1838. And there was also a suspected brother to this John, a Thomas Phillips, which looked interesting as well. So we were getting matches that were showing either 3rd or 4th cousin level. So we needed to dig a little bit more into these other John Phillips to find out what was going on. So as you could notice, we have some date discrepancies that created some duplicates. So something to keep in mind when you're adding people to your tree is that if there's any differences in the names, dates, or locations, these can produce and usually do produce duplicates in your through lines if you use Ancestry. So when we dug in a little bit more onto this first John Phillips, we noticed, hey, there's a James S. Phillips that's attached as the son of this John Phillips. What's going on here? We need to look into more and see what's going on. Maybe there's something not matching up in the facts. And we found that there actually was another John Phillips in the mix that we had identified. So with this potential ancestor of John H. Phillips, 1756 to roughly 1835, there were 3 through lines matches that we saw that came up. There was a match A that came from James's daughter, Catherine, and then there were 2 that came from James's son, Peter. But this John was from a different area. We didn't see him going to Maine and everything. He actually was in New York. He was in Rensselaer County, New York, and died in the township of Grafton. So we can say with some confidence that it's very likely that Joseph John Phillips is the potential grandfather of James S. Phillips, since we saw that other additional son named Thomas that we would want to investigate further, and there is another John Phillips out there. We think that this John H. Phillips is more likely to be the potential father of James S. Phillips, but it does need additional investigation. First, we need to investigate that other possible sibling, Thomas, to find out what's going on. Obtaining the Y DNA of a living male descendant of him may help confirm that he is a brother and indeed related to the same family. And additional genealogical records would be needed to help identify other potential siblings that are descendants and that may show up in the autosomal DNA. But I think we can say with some pretty good confidence, John doesn't really appear to be an immigrant from England. He's very likely that he was born right here in the United States. So if you're interested in signing up for a DNA consultation, let's talk about the next steps and what you can do and what this process looks like. If you want to purchase a DNA consultation, you can do so on our website by going under Tools, DNA Resources, and scroll down to the Post-DNA Result Consultation. You can also go under Bookstores, DNA, and scroll down and see the consultation product. You may have even also received an email as well talking about our DNA consultation services, which does have a direct button to our bookstore. You can even just call or email myself. This is my contact information if you want to reach me. And again, just as a reminder, the cost for a DNA consultation for 60 minutes is $150 an hour for members and $250 an hour for guests. So what are the next steps? Once you purchase that, we're going to then coordinate with you on a date and time to meet, whether it's in person, phone, or Zoom. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that we are getting ready for some big renovations. So we are going to be closed starting March 25th for the rest of the year. So any additional consultations will be offered via phone or Zoom if you still want to meet. And once we confirm a date and time, if we're meeting via Zoom or phone, we will send you a confirmation email so you have the date and time, and you can add that to your internal calendar if you like, just so you have it noted there. You also will have our direct contact information, and we're going to then ask you for any login credentials and supporting documentation related to your session. Talk about a few quick resources on AmericanAncestors.org. First is we have a free DNA resources research guide. So this goes over some of the basics that we talked about in DNA here, and does include links to different resources like the shared centimorgan chart, so you can figure out how you're related to different people, and other resources and bibliography on different DNA tools. We also have a video in our video library that talks about more advanced features on GEDmatch. So if you'd like to learn more about some of the different features in GEDmatch, you can look at this video that was done by genealogist Tim Jansen, who's involved with GEDmatch, to learn more. And finally, we also have a DNA section of our bookstore that you can look at. So if you want to look at like Bill Griffith's books again, which talk about his experience with doing DNA testing and finding us a surprise in his family, as well as just learning more about how to use DNA, whether you're adopted or not. We have lots of different books and resources that you can use. And finally, one thing I do want to give a quick plug for is we also have a free live chat with a genealogist. These are good for really quick genealogy or history questions. So maybe you want to talk about a very quick relationship you want to kind of run by us, maybe looking at the shared centimorgan chart or a type of test maybe you want to recommend. We can give you a quick recommendation on these and other genealogy questions from Tuesday to Saturday, 9 to 5, with extended hours on Wednesday night till 8 p.m.
All right. Thank you so much, Melanie, for that fantastic presentation. So much great information there. And we do have questions that have been coming in. Before I get to your great questions, I did just want to tell you about a few of our upcoming programs. So this first one shown here on your screen is a course on demand that we have available on DNA. Melanie was one of our presenters for this course as well, and it provides a deeper dive into using DNA in your family history research. It's available for purchase until July 31st, but once you purchase it, you will have access to the course materials for the foreseeable future, which include recorded lectures and handouts. If you have early New England ancestry, we have a couple of programs coming up that might be helpful for you. The first is a free online demonstration to help you learn how to leverage the Great Migration Study Project and its databases. This will take place on February 16th. And then in March, we have a 5-week online seminar on the basics of early New England research. You can learn about these and all of our upcoming events at americanancestors.org/events. All right, so now we will go ahead and get into your questions. So Melanie, we had a couple of questions come in here about why DNA tests. So the first one is asking, they just wanted to clarify, can only males take the Y DNA test?
That's correct, right. Only males can take the test because it's testing the Y chromosome.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And then we have a question here where the person says, I have my father's haplogroup through 23andMe. Is that not the same as a Y-DNA result? Could you please explain the difference between Y-DNA and the male haplogroup?
Sure. So the haplogroup is basically a code assigned looking at human migration patterns. Now, 23andMe does give you an estimated haplogroup, but it's not as refined and exact as the one offered through family tree DNA, which you can get through those specialized tests like Y-DNA. One other thing you're not getting with 23andMe is you're not getting the Y-DNA matches. That you can only get if you do a Y-DNA test.
Okay, great. Thank you. Um, so let's see here. So then we have a question from someone who's wondering, they say, is there a way that you can kind of compare your DNA results with different DNA databases? So maybe you could talk about, is there a way that you can kind of take a test with one company and then kind of compare with all the other companies to see if you have matches there?
Right. So in addition to testing at uploading your DNA to GEDmatch, because GEDmatch lets you see matches across different companies, you can
Mhm.
also upload your DNA to MyHeritage and Family Tree DNA. They both take uploads. Ancestry and 23andMe does not, but Family Tree and MyHeritage do. So you can upload your kit from another site if you wanted to see what it looks like. It's not really going to change the match list necessarily, but you might see slightly different changes in your results. But I think that GEDmatch is probably going to be the better one if you're trying to get more matches. But if you haven't had a test at MyHeritage and Family Tree, then yes, it might be valuable to take your Ancestry or 23andMe test and upload it there just so you can use that matching technology.
Great, thank you. Um, then we have a question here. So you had talked about the surname project groups, and this person's wondering, what's the best way to go about locating a surname project group that would work for your family history?
Sure. So actually on Family Tree DNA, when you create a kit, and I think even from an autosomal standpoint, if you just upload your kit to the Family Finder, if you go to find a project, which is at the very top toolbar, the system will actually give you a suggested list of groups where your surname is showing up. So depending on the surname you're using in your profile, it will suggest it. And there's also a feature to search for surnames or different locations by keyword if you wanted to find something that doesn't fit.
Okay, great. So then we have a question here. So this person's wondering, what would you recommend somebody do to prepare for a consultation, specifically the DNA consultation here?
Sure. So I would say the first thing you'd want to do is obviously one, have your test ready to go for review. If you haven't already done it, then you might want to wait until that comes back. The next I would say is to write out your goals. Figure out what your goals are and try to narrow that down to a line or two and get in touch with us. And if you're not sure about how much time you think we need, we can give you that estimate, and then you can go from there and kind of triage what's more important to go over during those sessions.
Great. I know we're in overtime here, but a lot of great questions. So we'll see if we can get to a couple more. So we have someone here who's asking, she says her father has passed and she does not have any brothers. So she's wondering who might be able to take a Y-DNA test for her, and wondering if a nephew would be able to do that for her. It would be her sister's son.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one good thing about the Y DNA and the mitochondrial is that even if you can't test the older generation, in that case, the nephew will still have his father's DNA. So as long as it's on the paternal side, that nephew, if you're trying to trace your father's line, then his DNA would be the same as if your father had tested.
Okay, great. All right, let's see here. So I think we have time for one more question. So we have someone here who's asking, is there a benefit of using the leads method that you walked through versus manually creating DNA groups on Ancestry or clustering on MyHeritage?
I think so. Depending on the type of question you're trying to answer, if it's a really close one, I think it's something that you definitely could apply and possibly even move it out to a more distant relationship and see how that comes up. You're just going to get a lot more colors and a lot more to work with, but it might seem a lot less complicated in trying to, decipher some of the numbers and everything. So I do know it works very well at a close level, but I think it couldn't hurt to at least start to build out those ones. But then you may still want to create those groups within Ancestry as you're trying to keep track of everything.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Melanie, and thank you again for a great presentation. So much great information there. Unfortunately, that is all that we have time for today. If you do have more specific questions about your family history research, you may consider hiring our research services team or using our expanded chat service that Melanie mentioned a moment ago. The chat service puts you in direct communication with a genealogist. It's free and open to the public Tuesday through Saturday from 9 to 5 p.m. That's Eastern time. And we have extended hours on Wednesdays from 9 to 8 p.m. To access this service, you can go to americanancestors.org/chat. Thank you again for joining us. As you leave this event, you will have an opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. This free webinar was made possible by the generous support of members and friends around the world. Please consider making a gift to American Ancestors to keep these programs free and to create more free programs for you and others. If you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center, americanancestors.org. Best of luck in your research, and I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.